so those are the parts. So you have your grades, you have your sustained activity, you have your leadership, and then the writing is what I was just talking about. That's your marketing and branding and explaining to them who you are. So you guys have heard about the varsity blues where they're paying these, side college counselors because they figured out the formulas, right? So they're like, oh, so they did this essay and they used this Shakespeare quote and then they were admitted. So then we're going to use that formula, right? So that's why they changed a lot. So when we were going to school for the UCs, you had to do a personal statement, right? This longer thing. And they've broken that up into smaller 4 insight questions, no more than 250 characters, I think, actually. And so it's like they want you to get to the point, land. I don't need your Shakespeare quote because I want to know about you.
Right.
Because while you should
have been know who Shakespeare is.
Exactly. And so while and don't tell me the whole story about your nana. Like that's like, if that's helping you get to your point, make it quick, and then tell me who you are and how that shaped you, right? Because at the end of the day, not only the reason why they should be looking for a fit, because the colleges are for sure looking for a fit.
Right.
They want to know, do you fit
Who
here?
we letting in here?
But do you fit? So if you say, if everyone here is really about study abroad and, going to find other experiences, and you're like, I live down the street and I don't never want to leave. They're like, wait, I don't know if you did your research, but that's kind of not who we are.
Right.
So I don't know if this is the right place for you. Or if you're going to a UCLA and you're like, I'm really shy, like I really need people to guide me. I call UCLA the New York of UCs. They like, listen, know where the L train is, come here, know how to get to it, and just, kind of like, that's a different kind of culture, right? Than if you're going to Berkeley and they're like, oh, be free, declare your major next year, But that's the nature of the environment that Berkeley itself is, right? And so they're like, if that's not you and you're not really into exploring, then this isn't a fit for you, right? So they're looking for that when they're reading. That's exactly what the readers are trying to do, to look to see if you are a fit for their campus based on the information that you give them, right? So that's what it should look like. That and when should they start? They can start taking college classes in seventh grade. They can take concurrent or dual enrollment classes at your local community college for free. And they can do that as early as 7th grade. Now, depending on how that's used in their application process, it's always looked upon favorably. In some cases, it can replace their college classes, so then they're saving time and money. When we're talking about the saving money portion, that's a way for them to save money. They can start that in 7th grade because those classes count, right? So if you're taking a transferable course to a Cal State or UC, and now they have a program with the HBCUs, with the LA Community College District, where you can take those classes and those classes transfer. So they can do a transfer, which is brand new. They did not have that program before. So if you went to community college, which used to be a disadvantage, you go to community college for 2 years, you think you're going to transfer, and they're like, yeah, you can transfer, but all that stuff you took, none of that count.
Right.
And so that used to be an issue, right? But now that is an advantage that students can take, and that helps them to save money in that way because they can do that in high school. So why not?
So, I'm sorry.
No, I was done.
Oh, so my next question was, you have younger children.
I do.
13 and 14. My son is 11. What can I do now for an 11-year-old to get him prepared for college and for even the thought process of college? He wants to go to Duke. This is what he says. But Duke just to play basketball, not because he wants to be a doctor, right?
Because they said Duke was a good school for basketball.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and can you hit on scholarships for sports?
I will.
What kinds of things can we do now to help like get his mind ready for high school and beyond?
Exposure. So there are, I love the like Upward Bound programs. Upward Bound has been around for decades, and they're tried and true. Those types of programs that are going to expose them to being on college campuses, because a lot of them are housed or are funded out of certain colleges. So allowing them, and they have those programs as early as 7th grade also, so getting them in those kinds of programs. I love the example that Don gave. I do that with my children too. If we're going somewhere, stop at the college So then it's embedded in their head, and they're starting to look, and then they can know, like, hey, I remember when we went to visit this school. Even if you have an opportunity and you have the resources, take them to Duke. Let them really
Find the
see.
t-shirt.
what
That's
it
what we
really-
got a
really
t-shirt
is.
for every place.
Well, that's
we
where I was
went.
going to start. I just haven't been to the mall to buy anything. But yeah, that's
But
where I was
like,
going
or
to
like
start.
college pennants, I did that for my kids just because it was a visual representation of what was possible. So every time I would go to a college, if they weren't with me, I'd buy a pennant and I'd put it up on their wall.
So
So
the
that
pennant
they
is
can,
the flag.
the little flag, yeah, the college flag. So I would put it up, our posters or whatever, and I had the
That's a good
the
idea.
Cal State system has a little poster designed for middle school students.
Okay.
That tells them, and it has like a little map, like this is the pathway to college. So they kind of see what it looks like. Oh, okay, this is the pathway. This is what I need to do. So it tells them the A through G requirements, which are the amount of years they have to take in every subject. And they start giving him that now, like, oh, okay, I need 4 years of English. So 1, 2, 3, 4. I mean, you can't fail none of them.
Right.
And so start building that, because I
Right.
think one of the major things when they do that transition from middle school to high school is understanding that middle school I can kind of get passed along, but now that I'm here in high school, all this stuff counts. And a lot of times, and I don't know why it is with the young men more than the young women, but the light bulbs go on a whole lot slower. And so then they're like 11th grade and they're like, oh wait, all this, and you're like, this is your last semester, you gotta get it, the
What's
colleges
next?
are gonna even
Yeah,
see,
yeah,
like you
yeah,
gotta get
yeah.
it together,
Right.
right? And so just really get them to understand the importance of, like, this is really important, this counts, some of this stuff you can't do over, and just really giving them that kind of exposure now. And I love programs because they're not going to hear it from you
Right.
the way that you're
they're
they're
not
not
gonna
going to
receive it.
they're not going to receive it, so they need to hear it from other people. So, and even with me in my school, right, I have their ear differently than their parents, but then when somebody from the outside comes on, I bring over 100 colleges to our campus every year to make sure that students have exposure to international schools, public schools, community college, everything. Because, and then when I tell them this, they say something, the same thing I say, oh, can you say that again? That was a really good point. And then the students are always rolling their eyes and laughing, because then it registers, right?
Yeah.
But a student taught me this. A student told me they need to hear something 7 times in 7 different ways to process, because I really was taken
I
aback,
believe that.
because I said, I'm telling you guys this stuff, like, why is it? Because then I was thinking, like, sometimes, you'll have some families that are like, you didn't tell my kid, right? And I'll have kids who say, no, you told me. I remember when you came to they can tell me what I had on. I had a student tell me, you had a Syracuse shirt on. I remember when you came to class, but you processed nothing, right?
Right.
And so they're like, they just need to hear it in different modes,
Yeah, especially
different
now.
ways,
Yeah.
from
They
different
need to see a
people.
reel.
No,
Right.
seriously.
Oh, my
No,
goodness.
seriously. And they do
You
have
need to say
those on
7
TikTok.
times to take out the trash.
Right,
Yeah.
no, exactly. And so they just need
Yeah.
to hear it in different ways and be exposed to it in different ways. And then that's what makes the difference. And then you will be surprised at how much they've retained, because some of it, they don't even realize that they've processed in the back of their head until they get there. And it's like, oh, I remember that now. So there's websites like, College Board has a website, Big Future, that he can go on. They have some portions that are designed just for middle school that they can use. You can do Google searches for middle school scholarship. You should ask their school, because I know for LA Unified they do have a college planning website that they utilize. So their school may have something in place, but the kids are just like, whatever.
Yeah,
And if the parents never know that existed, like, why nobody ever told me? So those kinds of things. There's websites like Niche and all those that kind of gives them a whole breakdown, of those different kinds of things. But that's what I would say, the exposure is key.
Okay, this is my last question. The SAT and the, what is it? The
ACT.
Is the ACT still like a big test that kids take, or is it not? And does it not hold as much weight as the SAT?
So the answer is it depends. And so I say this a lot when I'm in the college counseling, because it depends on where they want to go. So for California schools, we are test blind, which means they cannot look, California public schools, so your Cal State and UCs, they're test blind. They cannot utilize that for the admission process at all.
The
Yeah,
SAT
it's
or the
going
ACT?
well. Yeah.
It's gone.
Because of the pandemic,
It's
right?
Well, we've been fighting this for years, and just, you know, I am.
The bias. And
Yeah, I agree 1,000%.
Because
I was not
everybody's great test
I was not a
takers.
good test taker. I have 4 degrees, so clearly it was not an indicator of my academic success.
Mhm.
So I don't believe that the tests do that, and so we have been fighting that for many,
Do you
many
believe
years.
it was a weeding out process from the very beginning?
absolutely.
Yeah, because there would
Absolutely.
be families that could afford to do all the coaching and the preparation
Yes.
and can
Right.
pass it.
Yes.
And you have
And some
families
kids
that
just going in their
can't.
code and take
Exactly.
And I remember one thing I learned too, as a counselor about the different tests. The ACT focuses on what you should have learned in high school.
Mhm.
The SAT focuses on your potential to be a good college student.
Mhm.
So it's not even necessarily that you learned this material.
Exactly.
It's just
Wow.
how good can you take a test
Mhm.
and what's your potential to be a good college student, whereas the ACT is going to focus on what you should have learned in high school.
Right.
So,
So
it's
that
like a cumulative test versus something that.
so
you
that's
should-
another
Right.
way when you're thinking about which is better for your child,
Mhm.
but also to take the practice test too to find out
Absolutely.
which they perform.
But it's going
Better.
away anyways.
Well, so it's
California.
for California. So, and here's the thing that's the difference, right? So, and in the private schools, California private schools are test optional, which means they can take the test. If they're strong test takers and they feel
Right.
like they're gonna score, then they can submit those scores. It's up to them.
But
it's
is it
optional.
gonna benefit?
It won't hinder
It's not
them
gonna
at all.
hurt them.
But it will benefit them only if they have a high score, right? So if you
Mm-hmm.
don't have a high score, don't submit it, because if you submit it, they're gonna use it.
Mhm.
But you have the option of not submitting that, and it will not impact them looking at your application the same. So, you know, it's that. Now, if you're talking about, with the exception of Caltech, so when you talk about the engineering strong schools, your MIT or Caltech, they want to see the test and they want to see that you did good on it. But that's how they're designed. It's very analytical. Everything's math, science, and engineering, and that's what they're looking for. Now, when you talk about other states, especially HBCUs, they are still test optional, and everybody's kind of like, does this theory really work?
Can
the
know that they were
students?
test optional HBCUs.
Yeah.
Yeah, now.
Now.
So that came out of the wake of the pandemic, and so everybody kind of went test optional, or because it was like some people were flying people to states like Georgia, you know, because they were like, what pandemic? So they were still testing.
Right.
You know, with
Right.
Texas, they were like still testing kids,
Right.
and so people
Right.
were literally flying their kids out, and so we were like, what? And so now, though, they have remained, and they're like, we're just trying to see that first group of students as they get through, did they perform the same as the students who took the test before? So everybody's still like, every year I get 1,000 emails since then. It's like, okay, we're still we're test optional for the next year. We're going to be test optional, and that's why I say the landscape changes a lot. So if you don't have someone experienced or that's staying up on it, if I told you they were test optional last year, now they're like, nope, now we need a test again.
Right.
You know, that's the thing. But for HBCUs, and my daughter experienced this, there were no tests in California. She did not get the presidential scholarship. She had a 4.2, but because we didn't have any tests, she did not
She didn't
qualify
get it.
for the, because they were like, you have to have a test for it, and they were not getting around it, and they are still
Right.
still like that. So they require that you take one of the two of those tests in order for them to look at you for the highest scholarship. Now she got the one below that, but she was not able to get that presidential scholarship. Not something that she couldn't control.
And that was the merit base.
That was a merit-based scholarship.
And our girls their class was the first pandemic year of the kids going to college.
Right
So-
after the pandemic, or was it
No, when it
during?
began,
Yeah.
their high school class was the class where the pandemic started.
2020.
Yes. Yes. So my daughter as well went to Howard. She didn't do the test. She did get a scholarship, but she didn't get that top
And did they come
scholarship.
home? I'm sorry, it's kind of off subject. Did they come home during that 2020 year, or they stayed there?
They
They were in
stayed
high
in the
school.
dorm.
They finished
They
high
came
school.
home.
What you mean?
I'm talking about while the pandemic was
So they were
going
12th
on.
grade when
They were
that when
seniors.
it
They were
first
high
started.
school.
Okay.
But then
Yeah,
that first year
okay.
that they went, they were all in the dorms, but they were taking their classes online still
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
for that first semester, and they kind of
They were the
eased
test
them.
kids.
Okay.
Yeah, they kind of
Mhm.
eased them back in
Okay.
or whatever.
Yeah.
Yeah, so that's kind of the thing with the test. So it's really about really doing your research and knowing like what schools
require.
exactly require it and what don't. So it takes a lot more than it did before, you know, for students were like, these were the requirements, it's the minimum GPA, and that's
Yeah.
kind of it. Now it's so much more, and that's why the role that I do is so significant, because I'm the one giving that information. Nobody's just walking around knowing all that. Even as a
Right.
parent,
Yeah.
like I wouldn't have been, and I'm college educated. You know, and this is you know, this is the middle-aged woman. So listen, I did my application on a typewriter.
Right.
Okay, and was trying to get to
Right.
the post office
Yes.
with a stamp.
Yeah.
Now,
To check.
and so
And
how
check.
was like, and so how was I going to help her
Right.
and be like, I have 4 degrees, and it'd be like,
Right.
yeah, and what
Yeah.
does that mean? How are you going to
Because
help
it's
me
very different.
now?
Yeah.
Right,
Process.
the whole
It's
process
different.
is different, right?
Yes.
And so I don't, you know, I tell parents like, it's not you're not gonna know all those things. Yes, you can help,
Mhm.
you know, your student, but there are gonna just be things that you just don't know.
Right.
So there are a lot of families who get private college counselors to help them advise. And again, they're not all created equal, so you really have to do your due diligence about what are you providing, right, with this. So I have one of the students like, yeah, my college advisor told me like, do you really want to go out of state? So I was like, so you're paying them to just do the public school application that you gonna
Right.
do in my
That you could do,
workshop in an
right.
hour?
Right. Yeah.
So like,
Yeah.
what was that for?
Right.
But just knowing, like, really having that whole
Mhm.
experience is really important.
That's really helpful.
I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Go ahead. Go ahead.
No, just really quick. I'm
we
sorry.
can pick your brain on
I don't know if you said this earlier. Do you have workshops for parents only that you talk to the parents about college and how to help their kids?
I
along the
do
process?
in my job. I do.
Oh, okay.
I do, and I explain to them the process. So what I did a 11th grade when they're
Oh,
junior,
parent
their
night.
spring, and I did a whole little college knowledge night. And everything that I offered to the students, I gave many sessions so I was like, okay, here are this many workshops. These are all the things that and then they rotated around to the sessions so that they can understand what the process looked like and what I do with their students. Because there's always, you know, and I always use little Johnny as my example. Little Johnny always go home and be like, nope, and nobody in my school ain't doing nothing. Like nobody did anything, right? And so I do a general overview of what the whole process looks like, what they have to look forward to, and then I do many workshops for them.
Because
So-
when should the students be called? At what grade?
The academic counselors are going to call them in, and they're going to have the whole conversation because their coursework should be aligned to what it is that they want to do in their future. So if they say, I want to go to a 4-year college, and I'm looking at UCs, and they're like, well, yeah,
So
2
freshman
years is
year.
only what you need, but
Right.
you're going to
freshman
need,
year.
right? And those academic counselors should be meeting with them all the time, depending on how your college counseling program. I designed our program, so I push into the classrooms, and then I pull them out in 11th grade, and I pull them out in 12th grade.
Okay,
But
good
that's
to
just
know.
me because
So
I've
I'm
done
like,
it.
did your college counselor call you?
But I will say,
Yeah.
especially at larger high schools, I will say I am unique. I understand this. I have a passion for it, and I know what it was like to be a first-generation college student and not know and understand.
Right.
The majority of the time, you're not going to get that. A lot of that is the students self-advocating and going. And so, to the point is what you should be telling your students is going to get to know if they have a college counselor on campus or if their academic counselor does that advising. You need to go in, you need to talk to them, tell them your goals, have that conversation, and go frequently.
Right.
Because what happens is I get stuff all the time. And so when I know, like, oh, Don wants to go into aerospace, they have this special program for aerospace. Let me call Don out and
Right.
give her this information, or send or email this to Don directly because I know that. But otherwise, like, how would I know,
Right.
right? So I just get it and I'll do a general post, and if nobody bites, you know, because the kids aren't paying attention, then
Yeah.
you know, whatever. So it's really important because you don't know what your school's going to do. I mean, unless you're having that conversation, which you should be, but pushing your student to really go in and have the conversation, because that's not only preparing them to do that then, when they get to on the college campus, that's what they're going to have to do.
They're gonna need
Right.
to know how to
Get to know
advocate
how
for
to-
So
themselves.
empowering them. So yeah, on the
Mhm.
back end as a parent, you know, you can be calling and having a conversation and
Right.
making sure you're attending whatever's there, but also pushing them and following up and to get them to self-advocate, because that's going to be so important.
That's good information.
And they need to have a relationship with the counselors, because when it's time to ask for those letters,
Oh,
Right.
your
You wanna have a
counselor
relationship.
needs to
Oh, my
know
goodness.
who you are.
and the letters are the biggest thing. This is my biggest fight, because
Yes.
for the students are like, can you write me a letter and it's due tomorrow? And
Ah,
I'm
you
like,
Right.
and no, I can't.
No.
And who are you again?
Right.
I haven't seen you ever.
Ever, you know, and
Right.
it's
Right.
like, or the parents who are like, my son said you won't write his letter, and where have you been if you are
Mhm.
again?
Right.
And
Yeah.
so really, even as a parent, having that relationship with the counselors, but then also making sure that I have the students keep a brag sheet. So I created a brag sheet because I know what they're going to ask me. So I created a brag sheet designed around that. And if the students want to give me a resume or some other things they have, fine. But I tell them, you need to keep a running tab of this. And I tell them, it doesn't just have to be you. Sometimes it's hard to talk about yourself. You don't think about all the things that you're doing, but your friends do.
Yeah.
But your mom thinks you're the best thing since sliced bread. Your mama does.
Right. Yeah.
So, you know, ask them to help you with these things. So I
Yes.
ask them to talk about what's unique about them. You know, what are some adjectives to describe themselves, and explain that. So, you know, if you say, oh, I'm adventurous, how, why, or whatever,
Right.
and that really gives you the opportunity to know the students a little bit better. So I always find out information when I'm reading those about students, and I'm like, I never knew, like, you surf, like, what? I never knew that, you know. And so yeah, it was like, oh, that's interesting, you know. Or you're an artist, and you know, my STEM kids are so like buttoned up, and I'm like,
Right.
oh wait, you know how to do art. So things like that, and really getting them to keep even now, even for your middle school, to get them to keep a running tab of things that they're doing. And I say, don't just write down that I was in this activity. How much time did you spend? What did you gain or give to that organization?
And that's a good, empowering thing for children to learn self-esteem.
Mm-hmm.
Because a lot of times people think, oh, tell your kids you're pretty. Tell them they have some.
Right.
But knowing the things that they've accomplished and the things that they're interested, it makes them
Builds
pop
them
up a
up.
little
And
bit.
how does
So
they
that is a
contribute?
really good way
Absolutely.
to you know have.
I still am having that conversation ongoing with my college student, and when you're at a place like Howard, it's just like everybody's
Everybody's
like
great.
that.
Everybody
that's
has a
what she
4.0.
said. That's what she
Right.
said. It's like,
Everybody.
everybody's amazing, mom.
Yes.
So she's
Everybody's
like, telling me
special.
this, and so I
Yeah.
have to sometimes like, no, you've done this, and you did this,
Right.
and you did this, and then it's just like, oh, I didn't see it that way. I didn't
Right.
think of it that way. So just,
Mhm.
I still have that conversation with my college students. So
Right.
that's an ongoing
good.
thing.
Absolutely.
I think I'm gonna make one for myself.
No, and as you should. And
Right.
because the reason why I do that is because it's an area that I struggle. And I never forget, I had a teacher who told me at another school I was at, and I was like, I really just built the college going culture, and we really just had a whole thing. And she was just like, you're amazing. She was like, you don't brag enough about yourself. She was like, you don't talk enough about what you do. And I was like, because I'm too busy doing it. And that's just kind of, right? And so that's just kind of my thing. Like, I'm always, and I probably spread myself, and my family will say, like, oh, mom, you do the real estate. I'm also a real estate agent and investor. So it's like,
Yeah.
like
the
you have,
first lady.
right, exactly. So they're always like, oh, my job, that's their joke all the time.
Right.
But it's just like, I'm so busy doing things all the time that, like, to take the time to sit down and really process it and talk about and then look at the asset that I am to a lot of things, it's challenging for me. So then me knowing that about myself, then that helps me, right, to say, like, listen, I know that this is a struggle. I know what this looks like.
Yes.
And that's also the thing with being a first generation college student. I know what this looks like. I know what the struggle is. I know what you're feeling. So I tell them before because most of the time they're not going to come out and say it. And I'm like, you're feeling this, You feeling that?
Right.
You feeling this?
Say it for him.
Mhm.
And so I told a student on Friday, because they're getting ready to go on Thanksgiving break for a whole week. So when we get back, it's like 4 days and it's it.
And yeah,
And so
applications.
she was just like, high GPA and just whatever. It's like, oh, I'm gonna start at community college. I said, you're a first generation college student, and she just looked exposed. Like, how'd you know that?
Mhm.
And I was just like, I know what it sounds like.
Right.
And I said, listen, I said, you're enough.
Yeah.
They're so lucky to have you.
Mhm.
You're enough.
Yes.
And I made her say it. I said, say it to me 3 times.
Yes.
Say that I'm enough.
I'm enough.
Say I'm enough.
I'm enough.
No, I'm enough.
I'm enough.
And that's the thing, because you really have to know that, because
Yes.
imposter syndrome is real.
Yes. That will follow
It is
you.
real.
It'll
Like,
follow
do you
you.
know how many rooms, especially getting to the doctorate level, I've walked in and I'm the only person that looks like me. I am the only black. I may be the only female.
Right.
Even in the industry, even in real estate, like, I could be the only female.
Right.
Like, if I go into a doctorate program, I am for sure walking in, and I can count the 4 people who graduated with me that was in my school that looked like me, because all the
Right.
schools I went to were PWIs, predominantly white institutions, like every one of them. So every time I walked in, that was the challenge that I was met with, or I was the youngest. And so it was just like, and from every side, I was feeling like, do I belong here? Am I supposed to be here? You know, because you get and even when I went to my job, like, I'm on the west side now. And so it's funny because I never forget, I started there 6 years ago. When I started, I overheard a parent asking the secretary, like, oh, I heard they have a new college counselor. Is he any good? Because my last name is Scott, and it was just Dr. Scott. And so
Yeah.
the
Sounds
thought
just
was,
assume.
and assumed
just
that I was
assume.
a white male.
Yeah.
And then it was like, well, is he any good? You know, and so when they
Ah.
came in, it was like, oh, I just want to introduce myself. I was like,
Oh,
yeah,
I wish I could have recorded
I
that.
said,
shot.
that's what I said, oh, they were like, oh, I was looking for Dr. Scott. I was like,
Here
I am
she
she.
is.
And I was like, I thought I heard you inquiring about me in the other room. Right? That's what you get.
Wow.
But
Yes,
it is, right?
that's what
And so
happened.
having to overcome that, I know what that's like.
Mhm.
And so I know they're experiencing it, but sometimes they can't even identify what it is. Right? So
Right.
it's just like, let's talk about it. Let's put it on the table right now. I tell them when they get to senior, I say, everybody take a breath. I'm not doing a presentation yet. Everybody take a breath.
Mhm.
Breathe. Say, this is hard.
Mhm.
Say, this is scary.
Yes.
I'm afraid. I don't know if I'm going to make the wrong decision. I don't know where I'm supposed to do and where I'm supposed to go.
You need to have a retreat. Sign me up for Dr. Scott
Right?
retreat.
But
Yes.
and that's okay.
Yes.
That's okay. Allow yourself to feel those
Yeah.
feelings, right?
Mhm.
Because you can't get
You
past
gotta be
them.
honest with
Right.
You
yourself.
have to,
Right.
right? And if you don't
Right.
address them, they are going to haunt you,
Yeah.
and you will have analysis paralysis, and it will come and gone, and you will
Right.
still be sitting there like this,
Yeah.
and like the application process and everything
gone.
else have gone, and then you will be living with regret.
Right.
And then I have to be that person that comes into your job
Mhm.
while you living with the regret of what you didn't do, and you
Yeah.
miserable.
Yeah.
And I
And
do
you
not
gonna
do
give
that.
me
That
bad
happened to me
customer
last
service.
year with a job application that I did not fill out, and
Wow.
I lived with that regret up until now. So I got to fill out that application again.
Right.
2 years.
Yeah.
You see what I mean?
But
And you got
also-
another
You
opportunity.
got another
Sometimes
opportunity.
they never get that or never feel like they have the
Yeah.
opportunity
Right.
again. Because I'm sure there are other opportunities,
Yeah.
but sometimes you feel like you never get to do it in that space again.
Mhm.
You know, and in that way again.
And at that time,
And
I
the
think
regret is heavy.
what happens
Absolutely.
no, and what happens too, not only with first generation, but then you have second generation and the pressure that those
Absolutely.
kids feel. Because I know my daughter right now, my senior, is feeling like not only is she in the shadow of her sister
I
who
was
was
gonna
at
say
Howard,
that. I was gonna say
in the
that.
shadow of her sister who was at Howard, but then
Mhm.
both her parents,
Mhm.
you know, and so
Mhm.
feeling like, because I don't think, I'm just like, this is your next step. College is your next step. But we do know college is not for everybody.
Absolutely.
But I just want to know, what is your plan?
Absolutely.
And so I know that my children have that pressure
Mhm.
of, what am I going to do? And it needs to be great because I'm living in
Absolutely.
the shadow of, so you have, you know, both sides, the first generation and the second, you know, or a third in my kid's case of feeling as though they have parents who are educated or older siblings and their choice needs to be, you know, as great. That's a lot of pressure
and
as
that's,
well.
And that's I'm so glad you brought that up because I see this all the time when you have, you know, siblings, and I think one or the other extreme happens. Either a parent forces them to live in the shadow of their older siblings, and there's just something, and maybe I'm biased, I'm the older sibling, but like like I think there's just a difference in the drive that you take and you do than the younger siblings. And then I think what happens is they create this whole narrative. The parents may have never said that,
right,
but they create this whole narrative that I have to do what my sibling did, and it can cause one or two things. Either I'm really challenging myself to do that, or I just fall back because I feel like and shut down. And so I never forget, I had these two siblings, and one, the older sibling was like a unicorn. Like he was just like, I'm not as smart as that kid. Like I'm being honest. Like he was just one of those, like, he's like, he took all these AP classes.
It just comes easily.
He never, some tests he took for AP, he had never even taken the course and scored perfectly on it. Self-taught. And so he was just like that kid. And so when I was meeting with him, it was more about learn how to talk to your peers. Like learn how to be a kid, like learn how to be social. So when he got to senior year, I was like, nope, you're not taking none of those classes. What do you mean? Like he was freaking out. I was like, nope, you're gonna take leadership. You're gonna learn how to like be around, like do something social, right? And I was like, but then his brother, like every year, and he was like interning, like student intern in my office, and every year I'd be like, okay, have you gotten it figured out? He's like, no. Like, what do you like to do? I don't know. It took him until finally like 11th grade to give me like I kind of like to work with my hands, and I kind of like to do this. And I was like, okay. So I took him to Trade Tech, and I was like, the Metro Rail, we're building the infrastructure for, and this was some years ago. Like it was like, we're building infrastructure for Metro Rail, and he really fell into it. He loved it. He ended up going to Trade Tech, which was a 2-year. His brother got accepted to Harvard and Columbia. He turned Harvard down. He said it was too stuffy. But I forced him to even apply to Ivy League. He was like, I'm going to go to UCLA. That's all he knew, right? So I was like, diversity fly-in, and I was like, you're going to call them and tell them this is a choice that you're making, but you don't know, you want to come see. So they flew him out, he stayed, and then he made the decision to go to Columbia. But his brother went to Trade Tech. This was the first time, and again, this was some years ago, but it was the first time I heard a major like actuarial science, and I was like, oh, what?
Right.
and so he was like, this is where I want
to,
he's like, this is what I want to study, and this is what I want to go do. And he did that, has a Columbia degree, and the brother went to Trade Tech and worked in the Metro Rail program. And who do you think makes more money?
Metro.
Absolutely. And so I tell them, but the whole thing is, if he would have been trying to be, he wasn't his brother. It didn't mean that you're less than. And that's what I had
to end up depressed.
Exactly. And that was the road, I saw it coming. That was the road he was heading down, and he was just shutting down. And I was like, no. No. But a lot of times that doesn't happen. They don't.
There is someone there that's going to
and the parents aren't doing it, may not be doing anything at all. It's just something that the student feels, right? And so if you don't, as a parent, tune into that and figure it out and say, hey, you have your path too, and not because you're not going to not do it just because you feel like you can't live up to their standards. If it's for you to go to school, you're going to go to school, right? Because that is another cop out that they may use too, right? So it's a tricky balance, right? But you have to start having those conversations about like, what does that look like for me, and what does that look like? Have a table, you know, when you guys having family dinner, like, what do you want to do? What does that look like? Having those conversations now before they even get to that point, and then they feel less like I'm living in somebody's shadow because they've already done it, right? And then now I got to come behind it. But if nobody's done it yet, then now you have time to talk about it, and then everybody understands up front, this is what my decision was all along.
That's good. Can we end on sports?
Oh, sure.
Because they said, or there's some people that think that their kid is going to go to college on an on a sports scholarship. How likely is that? And is it always you have to be the best, D1? Can you just give the real information on what that looks like?
So
'Cause
I'm
everybody
glad
thinks they're going.
Yeah, and I'm glad you said that. Like I'm at a very sports heavy school. And so one thing, number one, the NCAA eligibility is different than the college eligibility. So there are some things that NCAA says that you have to have that's beyond what a college will even tell you have to have.
Right.
So that's one thing. Knowing that the eligibility requirement is one thing. The other thing is you do have to especially if you're talking D1 sports, you have to be the best of the best.
Right.
And you have to also be able to qualify to get into school. That's where they miss it.
Oh, you mean academically? Yeah.
Absolutely. That's where they miss it. They're like, oh, I'm gonna get in because nah, you gotta also get admitted.
Yeah.
Right. So that's the other thing too.
Right.
And then the scholarships, depending on if they're going to a public or private school, sometimes if they're going to a public school, they have a limited amount of money that they can give out because it has to be equal because you're getting money from the government. So it's only so many of these that we can give out. So I had a student who they were like ran track and were like, UCLA was like, we can only give you 80% because they were at whatever their threshold was. But then Washington State was like, we'll give you 100%. And so they were like, well, I'm going to take the 100%. But then you have had a student a few years ago, 2 years ago now, and she was like, oh, I'm going to turn it down this, just like beach volleyball. So there's only certain schools that do it. And so she was like, oh, I'm turning this down because I'm looking at my option. And they were like, okay, they're recruiting. They gave it out to somebody else.
Right.
And then she was like, the school she was waiting for was like, oh, no, we went another direction. She went back, it was gone. And so there are a lot of different things they have to be practicing. Most of the time they want them practicing with those schools ahead of time. They have to have the academics, the chances of them getting recruited. They really, really have to be top tier in order for that to happen.
Top tier in their sport and in academics?
And they're not in their academics necessarily, but in their sports. They do have to be admittable, though. They do have to meet the minimum requirements for that school because they have to justify, the students being able to attend. But the money is always different, right? And they're reserving that for their very top athletes. So they may say, you can come, and a lot of times it's like, you can come and you're going to redshirt, you're going to sit out or whatever, or you're not going to get a full scholarship, or this or that. But you can come. But the chances, like everybody is not gonna get in. They're looking at the top players at each, certain schools, and they do what's familiar, to be honest. Recruiters are going to schools where they know they've recruited athletes in the past that were good.
Right.
That's just human nature, right?
Oh, that's a good point.
It's human nature. And so I tell students that, I said, like, even if you know what you want to do and you really know now, like, I want to be, work for this, business firm or whatever, look and see where they're recruiting people from. Because they come back because it worked. It was a formula that worked. So they're going to go back again.
Right, that's good.
And so just do a backwards plan. Look at where are they hiring agents or where are they hiring recruiters from here. And then that's where I want to be. That's how I want to line it up the best. You'll have outliers every now and then because they're like, I heard about this one student that was at this random school that we never go to. So then that causes them, but then that starts a trend at that school once they get somebody there. But it has to happen first.
Right. We've been saying, because I have all my children are in sports, and I have 3 sons and 1 daughter. And my daughter right now is the superstar athlete, which is hilarious.
Makes the boys mad.
Yeah. Although the other ones are gaining speed, so who knows what's going to happen in the end. But I do tell them that that's not their only option. So we kind of ride both sides of the fence.
Absolutely.
Where it's fun. They all enjoy their sport currently, but those grades, let's keep them top tier, and then we'll see what happens when it's time to make those decisions. Is that how
Absolutely.
Is that
I had a student, and I tell the story. I don't know if did you know Robert anyway, we had a student who was like top tier student, very charismatic student. He was just like one of those, like the superintendent wrote his letter, like he was just that kind of student. Star football player, you know, everybody knew him. But when he was in 11th grade, he was taking the SAT. That was, you know, our district offers it in school. So he was taking the SAT. A recruiter came and wanted to talk to him and wanted to pull him out. Well, if he came out, it would invalidate his test. And I was like, absolutely not.
Yeah.
And the recruiter and the coach were pissed. They were like, well, what do you mean?
Yeah.
Blah, blah. I said, listen, let me explain something to you.
That.
I said, he has the academic merit to
Right.
get wherever it is he wants to go right now. I said, so I let him out of this test. And I was like, then he ruins that chance.
Right.
And
That's
I said,
such a good point.
Right. I said, but if he breaks his leg as a freshman,
Right.
I said, then are you going to continue his scholarship?
Right. No.
Yes,
No.
right.
And the
He
guy
loses
was just like this. He just
And
did
then
like
left
this.
him alone.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
So then if you
And
have
he loses.
a child that is Ivy League bound,
Mm-hmm.
but plays a sport that might not be top tier yet, who
Mhm.
knows at the end if
Mhm.
that happens,
Mm-hmm.
then which, you just see where the chips fall
Yeah,
later?
absolutely. This
You don't
is what
push them one way or the other. You
Absolutely
just keep
not.
pursuing Ivy League
Yeah.
and also keep pursuing the sport.
Absolutely.
Okay.
I tell students, spread your net wide.
Okay.
Yes.
And I said, and what'll happen is, I said, you don't go closing doors on
Right.
your own. The
Mhm.
wind will blow some of them closed.
Okay.
Just
Gotcha.
cast it wide.
Yes.
The wind is going to close some of them closed, and with the doors that are open at the end, then that's what you do.
That's for you.
That's a great
You know,
way to
and
end
it's
it.
and it's not only, and I'll just say this
Great
quickly, it's not only sports. I have a friend whose son went to college on an academic scholarship, full ride, but he was also in the band and got a scholarship to play in the band as well. So that's
Wow.
extra money,
That's
a
wide.
stipend.
Mhm.
Yeah, so
Mhm.
cast them wide.
And sometimes you can double dip.
I was like,
Yeah.
can you get a double scholarship?
Oh yeah,
double
he
dip.
he earned a double scholarship,
Mhm.
academic and band, and he's a composer
Oh,
on the
nice.
band, and it was the school that won a Grammy.
Oh,
TSU.
wow.
Oh,
Yes, he's in that band. He's doing big things,
Mhm.
but he wasn't an athlete,
Mhm.
and I think that's the other piece of there are more ways to get scholarships.
Absolutely.
But
Not-
for the longest time, we've been told, put your kids in sports so they can get
Mhm.
a ride through
Mhm.
school, and you know,
Yeah,
it doesn't necessarily
That
doesn't have to be.
dispelled.
Yeah.
It doesn't have to be.
And or it can be both. So we had a
Yes.
student who went to play football for Duke. He graduated a whole semester early. And so his unique situation, we do these academic jackets, like Letterman jackets at our school. And so we were having that ceremony. And then right when it was over, they did a signing day for him. And then we were able to present him his diploma because he had finished his
Oh, wow.
requirement. And he went to Duke a semester early so that he could practice.
Wow.
So he got both because they wanted him to come. So he just did his requirements. He was smart, so he just did his requirements, took things at community college so he could advance the stuff that he needed,
Right.
and he graduated.
You can get both.
And he had both.
Oh, that's
And it's
good.
always good because you never know what's going to happen. And
Oh, yeah.
unfortunately, if they get hurt in sports or whatever the
it.
situation, I had a friend whose son went to play sports and got all these scholarships and got there, and the politics of sports, he ended up getting cut from the team after he got there. So if he was just only going to do that, then what?
Yeah.
Right,
Yeah.
Then what?
right.
Yeah.
Be ready across the board.
Exactly. You gotta
That's
stay
good.
ready so you ain't gotta get ready.
Thank you so much for joining us.
Yes,
This was
thank
a
you.
nice treat.
Yes.
We didn't have to talk about menopause today, but we got to get some good gems.
Think about our children.
We appreciate having you as a
Thank you for
resource.
having
Yes,
us.
and listeners are going to love.
So you guys don't have to have
So
me back
please
for
come
real
back.
estate, and I'll put my other hat.
Yes. Your first
And
lady
investment.
hat, your
Yeah.
all of it.
Yeah.
Yes,
Yeah.
thank you.
Thank you
Thank
guys
you
so
so
much
much.
for
Thank you.
listening. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe, and we will see you on the next episode.
Woo, woo.
Bye.
Bye.